my great pleasure to welcome you all here in the room in Zurich as well as online. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to have with me in this panel Commissioner Keith Sonderling from the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission in Washington, US. We have also David Barnes from IBM. We have Matthew Forshaw from the Alan Turing Institute. We have Jose Escamilla from the Institute for the Future of Education, Mexico. Mona Sloane from NYU and Merve Hickok from Alteist organization. My name is Ekkehard Ernst. I'm your host today. I'm from the International Labour Organization, and I'm very pleased to have you on. I just want to give some few introductory remarks to just kind of frame maybe of the panel and place it in, so that you all have an idea what we are talking about in the next 90 minutes. I don't have to tell you here in this panel and this discussion that rise of AI at the beginning of the 2010s triggered really global concerns for jobless future. There was a lot of discussion about where are we running out of jobs? How will we even will anybody of us will have jobs? There was discussion around the universal basic income or even the fear of generalized artificial intelligence. And I think it's fair to say that 10 years later, the concern is rather where are the workers to do the jobs? So in a sense, we are in the age of shortage. And the question really is, can machines help? And I think one of the discussion points that we will have this afternoon is really, where do we see ourselves in next year, next 10 years? And will these new technologies that are being made available through AI and other digital tools really help us to deliver rising living standards as we promised, especially from our friends from the tech industry? I think mostly the concerns have shifted, and I'm glad that we have people here, both in the room and online, that can cater to this in terms of three main concerns. First of all, actually, AI introduces new forms of risk for employees or for the world of work more broadly. There's issues around algorithmic management, surveillance, the list of loss of autonomy, the whole shift in kind of how workplaces are organized and what kind of new risk in terms of occupational safety and health, in terms of mental health as well, these new technologies we create. The second type of concerns we kind of encounter increasingly is that AI is being rolled out in different recruitment tools and performance management tools, etc., enhances and magnifies existing discrimination. We have, especially for groups that already suffer from historic discrimination in recruitment and career options and wages, performance evaluation. These kind of groups will or are likely to encounter even more risk and more discrimination going forward if these tools are not properly being developed and framed. And then the third set of risks is it undermines existing forms of protection. As you know, the famous wording at the tech industry, move fast and break things. I always say this, it's very easy to be profitable if you don't respect labor laws. And so Uber, just to name one of the companies to kind of follow that motto, has needed to replace itself under the impression under the changes of regulation and application of labor laws. So the second kind of big part of the discussion will be what other barriers other than the ones that I have just mentioned will be faced for decent work and equitable growth, and how do we address them? And then I think a last point that I would like to address with my panelists here is talking about different policy initiatives that we already see. And a lot of companies have come out with AI ethical guidelines. Google, Meta, etc. Microsoft have put together guidelines in this respect. And the question is, how binding are they? How much bite do they actually have? And we see that at least in Europe, we have discussions around an AI Act that is in the making right now. The US just recently released an AI Bill of Rights. Question is, again, how much bite will these kind of new initiatives have, and how will they interact with the existing regulation that we have? And I just make a bit of self-promotion here. The ILO, the International Labour Organization, is about to launch and propose a new AI policy observatory that will cater exactly to this kind of international dimension of regulatory options, if you want, and the implication it has for the world of work. And so the question again to my panelists here: with what can and should policymakers do to address the challenge that I just outlined before? And in particular, I think it's not only policymakers; it's also from the point of view of the International Labour Organization, also what business and social partners can do to address these issues. So without further ado, let me give the floor to our keynote speaker, Commissioner Keith Sonderling. Just to introduce you quickly, Keith Sonderling was confirmed by the US Senate in September 2020 to be a commissioner on the US Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, as I just mentioned, and he previously served as the Commission's vice chair. Prior to his confirmation, Commissioner Sonderling served as the acting and deputy administrator of the Wage and Hour Division of the US Department of Labor, where he oversaw enforcement, outreach, regulatory work, strategic planning, performance management, communication, and stakeholder engagement. During his tenure, the division accomplished back-to-back record-breaking enforcement, collection, and education outreach events. Sonderling oversaw the development and publication of large-scale deregulatory rules and authored numerous opinion letters, field assistance bulletins, and all agency memorandums. He was also instrumental in developing the division's first comprehensive self-audit program, which collected more than $4 million for nearly 10,000 workers. So I'm very pleased to have you here, Keith, and we're very much looking forward to your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And first, I want to thank Aisha for putting this together. And, it's been a long time coming to be back in person, and I'm really excited for the chance to be here and have a discussion with all of you. I want to first talk about, leading into this really interesting panel, what we're about to have relating to the future of work and why I'm interested in this and why I'm focusing on this. So as you heard, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is the premier civil rights organization in the United States in the workplace. So when you think about the Me Too movement, you think about pay equity, you think about all the big ticket items, any types of discrimination, that's my agency. And we have a lot to deal with. But I've been focusing on the use of technology in the workplace because, as you'll hear in this panel, the future, it's really happening right now. And as you've heard the last couple of days online or in person today, you've heard so much about artificial intelligence, whether it's the general use of artificial intelligence, whether it's specific use of artificial intelligence. But when you start talking about the use of artificial intelligence in the workplace, it's a different story, because now you're dealing with some of the most fundamental rights. I normally say in the United States, but I think everyone will agree worldwide. And that's the ability to enter the workforce and thrive in the workforce and provide for yourself and your family without being discriminated against. So now that we have AI being dealt with in this area, it's different than other areas. And not just because this is my background, and I think so. I think we can all agree that dealing with civil rights and artificial intelligence should largely take priorities over other uses. So especially now, as companies really start to integrate AI across the board, they see how much money they're saving with some of these technologies in their businesses. They're doing things faster, as you just heard. But now when you're coming into HR, it's a different story. So for some, artificial intelligence in the workplace, what do you think about? You think about these robots replacing human workers. And there's a lot of stats out there that really are driving that point home. For instance, the World Economic Forum predicts in the next 4 years, 85 million jobs will be displaced by artificial intelligence. There's a study in the US that looked at the job descriptions from the Department of Labor broadly. So out of the 769 job descriptions in the US that the Department of Labor tracks, 740 of them have some near-term risk of automation. And we are now seeing companies invest in robots to actually replace workers. The robot orders were up almost 40% from the year before. And you know what? It's going to be cheap. There's some studies out there that show replacing 2 to 4 workers is only going to cost companies around $10,000 a year. So a lot of the conversations about artificial intelligence relates to that. But what I want to talk about, what I'm focusing on, is something different. Because from the standpoint of AI and workplace discrimination, we don't need those stats about the future, because the future is already happening now. And why is that? HR departments now have more information about individual workers and their workforce as a whole than ever before. But information, as you all know, is not the same as knowledge. And that information needs to be disseminated. So that's where AI comes in, culling and correlating all this data on a massive scale to make workforce-related predictions. And that's turning into huge business. HR technology alone last year was worth, companies were spending around $17 billion. And the value of AI recruitment platforms just on the front end of the recruitment side is estimated to be around $3 billion in 2025. So the reason I'm looking at this and the US government at the EEOC is looking at this is because it's already involved in every single stage of the job lifecycle. And their products are, like other uses of AI, are being sold to make these decisions more efficiently, economically, and effectively. And many of these programs are being bought by large corporations because they promise to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace by mitigating bias. So for a lot of these companies, it's not going to be a hard choice whether or not to implement artificial intelligence in HR. The hard choice, and what we're going to discuss, is how do you do that and what purpose, and how do you not violate the law? So like I said, it's being used everywhere. AI writes job descriptions, screens resumes, chats with applicants, conducts job interviews. It predicts if an employee will accept an offer. And then there's some software that predicts how much money they'll take to accept that offer. And then there's some even crazier software that will predict how that worker, the new worker, will interact with their coworkers. It identifies employees' current skills and potential skills. It tracks productivity, assesses workers, and picks who gets those valuable learning, upskilling, and reskilling opportunities now. Nowadays, if employees fall short of expectations, there's even AI out there that will tell them they're fired. So obviously the pandemic has increased the speed of which these programs are being developed and they're bought. My position on all this generally is that if it is carefully designed and properly used, AI does have the potential to advance diversity, inclusion, and accessibility in the workplace, which is what companies are really striving to do. And you've heard about all the ways humans are vulnerable to bias. It's one of the reasons my agency exists. For example, there's studies in the US. A male resume and a female resume apply to the same job. The male is more likely to get selected, even though their characteristics are the same. And the same goes in America. There's a study about African Americans and Asian Americans who, if they remove those characteristics from their resume and so-called whiten their resume, they're more likely to get selected than if they had those on theirs. So AI now is coming to promise and help eliminate that bias from the earliest stages of the hiring process. So an example I like to use often is think about somebody's name. What does somebody's name tell you about their ability to do the job? Absolutely nothing. What it does tell you is characteristics you're not allowed to make an employment decision off of, such as their sex, national origin, religion, or sometimes of even race. So carefully designed AI can really help eliminate some of this bias from the earliest stages of the decision-making process. But at the same time, if AI is poorly designed and carelessly implemented, so flipping what I just said, it can discriminate on a scale and magnitude far greater than any one individual HR professional. Because as you all know, artificial intelligence is only as good as the data being fed to it, and then who's actually using it itself. Because AI makes the predictions about specific applicants based on the training data. So algorithms that rely on the current workforce may just replicate the status quo if the current workforce is made up of certain individuals. And we'll talk more about that in our panel. So from my perspective at the EEOC, because it's being used globally across the board, I'm trying to raise awareness before companies go all in on artificial intelligence in recruiting and employee management. It's all really, if you think about it, it's about the data. Just like everything else in artificial intelligence. Data is going to make the decision between a good hire and a bad hire, a good promotion and a bad promotion. And what I'm trying to raise awareness of, it's the difference between a lawful and unlawful decision. Because AI can really help correct for some of the issues with humans and their bias. Because you can engineer AI to not look at some of those protected factors that humans have been looking at for a long time. So I'm really excited about our panel. I know we're going to dive into this a lot more. We're going to talk about, I'll give some actually very specific examples of how artificial intelligence is being used and how it could potentially violate some of the laws across the world. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to join this esteemed panel. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Keith. And I mean, the one point that I drive from your opening remarks was really the issue about data. And I feel like Mona Sloane can help us a bit to dig deeper into that particular question. So Dr. Sloane is a sociologist working on design and inequality, specifically in the context of AI design and policy. She frequently publishes and speaks about AI ethics, equitability, and policy in a global context. Mona is a senior research scientist at the NYU Center for Responsible AI and a research assistant professor at NYU's Tandon School of Engineering, as well as a fellow with NYU's Institute for Public Knowledge, where she convenes the Co-opting AI series. Mona is the founding director of This Is Not a Drill program at the NYU Tisch School of Arts, which develops a public pedagogy on art, equity, technology, and the climate emergency. She also serves as the technology editor for public books and is a fellow with the GovLab. Mona, the floor is yours. Please give us your insights into what we just heard. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I also want to extend my sincere thanks to the organizers for putting together this fantastic conference. And of course, Commissioner Sonderling for this fantastic keynote that we just heard, which will serve as a perfect launchpad for hopefully a very productive discussion. As the sociologist at the table, I am very interested in the role that these kinds of technologies play for the organization of social life and how that intersects with the distribution of power, as Commissioner Sonderling has just really wonderfully illustrated. So really at this point, AI has become what I would call infrastructural. It is really intimately entangled with how we distribute power, organize society. And that means that the paradigm of prediction, so using past data to make predictions for what could happen in the future to make a decision in the present, has become what I would call a social superstructure. And that can come with a lot of risks: discrimination, harm, inequality at scale, all happening at the intersection of well-known the fault lines of race, gender, class, and many more. And that, of course, increasingly plays a role for how people have access or can get access to the labor market. I'm particularly interested in the use of AI in recruiting. I'm currently conducting a large study on that. And of course, AI is also deeply entangled with recruiting. So we have a lot of tools, social media platforms, resume parsers, rankers, psychometric assessments, personality assessment, video interviewing tools, speech and emotion analysis, and so on. And so these are used for high volume applications. So hiring a lot of people at the same time for the same type of job, as well as for finding people with very specialized skill sets. So it's not that we're seeing it, in just one bucket versus the other. And so there is, of course, a rush for compliance, which I think is very important and much needed. But as that happens, I think we need a much more granular understanding of what kinds of technologies are out there, how they are embedded into the professional practice of recruiting and the dynamics of getting access and retaining access to the labor market. And specifically, I think as a scientist here, or a social scientist, we need to find a structured way for assessing the assumptions that underpin these AI technologies. I'm going to give you an example. The idea that personality is stable enough that it can be measured and technically assessed and then be used as a basis for making an employment decision is not grounded in science. So when we talk about audits, for example, or other kinds of regulatory interventions that can help us mitigate the risks that come from that, we need to take that into account and expand kind of assessment of these tools into a more social science domain and combine that with more technical measures. And I'm happy to talk a little more about that. And I'm going to leave it at that for now. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mona. I think that was an excellent introduction to our next panelist, David Barnes, who's Vice President, Global Workforce Policy at IBM. And I think David, you can share maybe a bit of an industry perspective on this. So David leads the IBM's global agenda in workforce public policy based in Washington, D.C. He oversees IBM's advocacy on a range of issues, including the future of work, labor, and employment rules, skills and education, diversity, and the use of AI in employment. He engages on these topics with government leaders and in multilateral fora such as the G7, the EU, and the OECD, where he's vice chair of the business of the OECD Employment, Labor, and Social Affairs Committee. And David, I really would like to hear you, especially now on these points around the stability of personality that may actually not be an assumption that is validated by reality. So thanks a lot, and the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, and for the opportunity to be here. And sorry, I couldn't be there in person. Look, I see three imperatives for good stewardship by employers and policymakers for a positive future of work with AI. First is a principles-based and human-centric approach to AI development and deployment. Second is better equipping workers with the new skills AI could demand in their jobs and for transitions to new career opportunities. And third is regulation of AI in employment that is risk-based according to specific use case and human impact. IBM has a principles-based approach to AI, which assumes a culture of transparency as the most important foundation for ethical AI and user trust. The purpose of AI developed and applied by IBM is to augment and not replace human decision-making. And we ensure that to ensure trust, our AI systems have got to be transparent and explainable, and they make clear when and for what purposes AI is being deployed, and what are the major sources of data and expertise and the methods used for training. Now, proactive addressing of bias and monitoring of AI are necessary through the life cycle with continual testing and improving of data sets to ensure fairness and equitable treatment. Because our people must understand how, and users must understand how an AI system reached a conclusion or made a recommendation. And we established a governance model back in 2018, which we built on an internal AI ethics board. And the board has the authority to implement its decisions and enforce its decisions. It can say, no, you have to stop or fix this. For example, the board played a central role in IBM's decision to stop offering, researching, or developing general purpose facial recognition software. But, ethics is more than a box to check. In AI development, we practice ethics by design from the outset, not as an afterthought. But AI ethics is also really, frankly, a journey on which it is best to remain, quite humble. We introduced AI into employment or HR applications back in 2014. We started that process. And in those tools that we use, there is a human in every decision. We do not use AI in our recruitment processes, except to nudge hiring managers regarding diversity in slates of candidates and incorporating diverse perspectives into interviews. And we do not use algorithmic management of our employees. Apart from helping our people make better decisions, much of the reasons we deploy AI is because it provides personalized experiences and improves employee engagement. Examples of the kinds of applications we use in HR include an online learning platform that provides personalized learning experiences for each employee, HR chatbots to provide advice on programs, policies, and other guidance, skills supply and demand forecasting that provides recommendations for managers for new hiring or reskilling programs for existing employees. Building AI-relevant skills and smoothing AI-driven job transitions should be a priority for governments, for employers, and for workers. Because this evolving technology means supporting continuing investments in learning that will provide sustainable careers. And doing so will reinforce long-term job prospects and also, importantly, mitigate anxiety about AI. But unfortunately, across the OECD, spending on worker education and training has been declining. Education systems are not keeping pace. In the EU, only 54% of residents have basic digital skills. So there's much to do. And finally, on the imperative of regulation of AI, we see precision, risk-based regulation based on the specific employment use case and human impact as the best way to protect society without hindering innovation. The draft EU AI directive is somewhat misguided in defining the broad category of employment use cases as being high risk. because frankly, they are not all high risk. As well, rules adopted for high-risk use cases like algorithmic management in the EU Platform Workers Directive should not be considered a precedent for general application to other lower-risk employment use cases. Employers also have to recognize the national labour relations institutional frameworks and social context into which AI is being deployed. For example, in Germany in 2020, IBM implemented with our Works Council a best practice framework agreement for consultation on the deployment of AI tools that uses a risk-based methodology for each employment use case examination. In the US, IBM adopted co-creation development models for AI applications in HR, which involve thousands of our employees in the co-creation process for things like our employee learning platform and other HR systems. So to sum up, we need a culture of transparency and a human-centric approach. We need to invest in learning and reskilling, and we need to be surgical in regulating high-risk use cases in employment. Thank you.
And thank you very much, David. I think we come back to the issue about regulation, but before we do that, I would like to kind of zone in a bit more into this issue about skills. And I think I have the right person just sitting next to me, with Matthew Forshaw, Senior Advisor for Skills at the Alan Turing Institute in Oxford and Reader in Data Science at Newcastle University. Dr. Forshaw's work in data and AI skills includes working with the government on the skills pillar of the National Data Strategy, leadership of skills policy initiatives through the Data Skills Task Force, and as an expert advisor to the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sports. So Matthew, please tell us a bit more about the skills and the capacity or the possibility for governments to actually properly anticipate. We actually have a question in the chat exactly on that point. So how do we actually anticipate skills properly?
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. So what I'm hoping we'll be able to do across this panel is reflect on the really valuable contributions we've had this morning and as well online over the last couple of days. What I'll try and bring is a perspective from the UK national skills landscape and some of the work that we've seen in terms of policy interventions that can be effective in driving the advances that are deeply needed. As a high level figure, for the UK, we are 248,000 in skilled data professionals short of where we need to be, and that was an instantaneous figure from around 12 months ago. I think there are a couple of issues that are really key that need to be addressed. The first is around diversity. So in the UK, 70% of the roles that are at risk of automation, of which AI plays a significant part, they're held by women. So it's clear that there's an urgent imperative to intervene and to act rapidly to avoid discrimination there. And I suppose furthermore, we want to see a future where data science teams, either directly developing or overseeing the governance of their introduction, are as representative of the population that are impacted by their outputs as possible. I think there's a significant opportunity in making sure that individuals coming through learning journeys, whether that's through undergraduate degrees, through school level training, are able to exhibit the sorts of day one competencies that are expected of industry, because I suspect at the moment there are some particularly acute mismatches there. I think something we see as well is a lack of clarity around role descriptors when we talk about data science and AI. That complicates hiring decisions and is a challenge that SMEs feel particularly acutely, and is something that with UK government we're working hard to address. I think there's something very important to unpack around the role of workforce upskilling. So in the UK, 80% of our workforce of 2030 are already in employment. So any school or university level intervention we put in place is going to miss that mass of capacity. So there's a need for flexible routes to learning and ones that are particularly tailored towards high growth potential SMEs in this space. I hope through the panel we'll be able to unpick some of the Turing's work, which has been around capacity building in this space, democratizing access to data science talent, data science training, and to be able to do so across disciplinary boundaries. I hope we can talk a little bit more around the training gap around ethics, Anaconda, who are an organization in the scientific Python community, surveyed data science graduates, I believe late 2019, and found that only 15% of those graduates of data science programs felt they'd received any training on ethics. So clearly there's some mileage there. And then also a challenge around how do we support people to uphold the sorts of professional values that everyone in this room knows are important. So I hope we'll be able to talk around some of the work in the UK around the Alliance for Data Science Professionals, which is a collaboration of many of our professional bodies who govern the chartership and professional certification of data science professionals to come together in a unified way and try and resolve some of the challenges I've outlined. So I hope we can unpick some of those this session.
Excellent. Thank you much, Matthew. I think we talked a lot now on the situation in the US and the UK. Let's kind of broaden our scope and our focus a bit more, kind of getting the bigger international picture. And I think I have the right person with me online in this panel, Merve Hickok, who's Research Director at the Center for AI and Digital Policy and founder of AIethicist.org. Merve is the founder of, as I said, the founder of AIethicist.org. She's also Research Director and at the Center for AI and Digital Policy, which educates AI policy practitioners, and maybe that kind of caters to your point, Matthew, and advocates across over 60 countries. Merve's work focuses on AI bias, impact of AI systems on fundamental rights and social justice. She provides consultancy and training services on responsible AI development, use, and governance to private and public organizations. Merve is a data ethics lecturer at the University of Michigan. So Merve, please give us your insight of the broader international picture in this area. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and great to be on this panel with these esteemed panelists and in this conference. So I thank Aisha again for the invite. I sit at a very unique intersection. I was a former HR professional where I was managing recruitment technologies and diversity recruitment for more than 20 countries. I left the corporate world to start AIethicist.org several years ago, and then also, as you mentioned, working on Center for AI and Digital Policy, where we focus on AI policy and regulations and how they impact fundamental rights, rule of law, and democratic values. When we look at, and we sitting at that unique intersection, as well as with the center's work, we get to be involved in a number of policy and regulatory discussions, whether that is European Commission's EU Draft AI Act, whether it is with the Council of Europe AI Convention that is currently being drafted, and engage in conversations with partners in civil society, OECD, to a certain extent, the local and federal partners here. Commissioner and I discuss or cross paths a lot on those conversations as well. But looking at the policymaking and regulations for AI and workplace, that covers a lot, right? So we're talking about AI and algorithmic systems, upskilling, etc. But it also covers issues on fundamental rights, civil rights as they apply to employees and candidates, workplace safety, etc. So across those different flora and landscape and actors trying to regulate AI and workplace practices, we're seeing some divergences as well as convergences. I think there are a lot of questions around how to assess the impact, how to regulate, how to design responsibly, and how to regulate these tools properly. So they actually benefit the candidates, the employees, and the organizations. However, we also see some power imbalances in these conversations as well. My work is very much focused on AI and algorithmic systems as they relate to hiring, performance management, and employee surveillance. So we're much focused on those kind of policy and regulatory discussions and asking the questions, to Mano's point, do the systems deliver what they say they would deliver? Are they better for candidates, employees, and organizations? Do they perform equitably for all candidates and employees? Or are we leaving some people behind? Do we always leave the same groups of people behind? What existing civil and fundamental rights we have? And do candidates and employees really get to benefit from the protection of those civil rights and fundamental rights as they engage with these algorithmic systems? Or has the systems actually changed the dynamics and power relationships? What changes are necessary to ensure these systems are designed and governed responsibly? What transparency and accountability mechanisms are necessary for sustainable and enforceable protections? So across the policy and regulatory landscape, like I said, a lot of different actors at different administrative levels are trying to tackle these questions. We have the EEOC Commission looking at technical guidance, awareness building, and also has its enforcement powers. We are looking at, especially on the US side, also FTC as looking at commercial products, not the employers, but the vendors or the companies using and developing these systems. At local and state level, a number of diverse regulations and bills have been introduced and regulations are in place. For example, New York City requiring a bias audit for algorithmic systems used in employment decisions, or automated employment decision tools rather. Right now, like I said, there are so many developments, but we don't know which one of these are actually going to be effective, meet the needs of these challenges, and how do we get to, I think the question stands, how do we get to a point where we're starting to see best practices, better practices, and kind of make those practices more applicable at different levels. I think we might be with best of intentions trying to regulate where it is definitely necessary, but I think we're still at that point of trying to figure out what is the best way to approach in terms of assessing the effectiveness of these methods, as well as what is going to fit into that purpose and what context. And I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Merve. I think before we do another round of sharing some insights, I wanted to bring in the discussion and maybe the perspective from Mexico here. Jose Escamilla is with us. Dr. Escamilla is the Associate Director of the Institute for the Future of Education at Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico. The purpose of the institute is to generate, transfer, and disseminate applicable knowledge on education innovation in connecting, inspiring, and accompanying those who seek disruptive solutions for the future of higher education and lifelong learning. And I think especially the lifelong learning part, I would like to know more about this. Jose was Director of GemLabs, Dean of the Graduate School of Education, and Director of Education Innovation at Tecnológico de Monterrey. Please, the floor is yours. Give us your insights about what's currently happening in Mexico.
Hi, thanks for the invitations, and good morning, good afternoon from Monterrey, Mexico. I have been working in this area for a few years, but the Institute for the Future of Education is fairly new. It has been formed like a year and a half. It's a very important project of the university, and the focus of this institute is in higher education and lifelong learning. So this panel is very important for us. I will focus my participation more on the skills development in general. So we know that there is a demand in the world for technological skills, and it's growing a lot, but also for soft skills. So what we should focus in terms of skills development is disciplinary skills, but also including AI and digital skills, such as AI and data science. And in order to blind our students and our workforce for the job losses that will become evident because of the advent of AI, robots and automation, one of the things that we should focus is in non-disciplinary skills that are so important that I like to call them power skills. Those skills that are related to learning how to learn, cognitive skills, critical thinking, creativity, etc., that are harder for computers to automate in a general sense, not in a specific field, but in a general field. And those things will be very valuable because that's how workers could be changing from job to job and eventually reinvent themselves from career to career up to retirement. No, particularly in Latin America, the problem is bigger because Latin America is the region of the world with the biggest skills gap. So offer and demand are not matching. 2 out of 3 young Latin Americans are not properly qualified for jobs that require complex technical, professional, or managerial skills. And in some countries in Latin America, 50% of the jobs could be automated already. And the reason that they are not automated is because of price point. No, the salaries are low in general in Latin America. And also social issues, no, the problems that it will cause. How can we address these things? In general, I think that the governments can contribute by offering a diagnosis of the skills demanded by companies and aligning all the actors in the ecosystems, such as universities and other training providers with incentives. I think the Singapore case is a good example. And also offering more possibilities of a flexible curriculum where alternative credentials could be, or short courses, short cycle programs could be one of the solutions for that. Universities have a lot to offer there also, and I would like to share in the few minutes that I have left some of the initiatives what we have been doing in the Institute for the Future of Education at Tecnológico de Monterrey. We created an open innovation initiative. It's called T-Prize. It's the Transformation Prize. It's a prize where every year we run a challenge, and we invite startups and non-governmental organizations to develop solutions that reduce the skills gap in Latin America using technologies. Every year we have 5 winners of that. We give them some seed money and a follow-up of 2 years to make them grow. We have been doing that for 2 years now, and we have the first generation of startups graduating. We believe that at the end of this, after 5 years, we will have 25 startups, non-governmental organizations working on different areas, different problems to reduce the skills gap in Latin America. Some of them are using AI solutions, some of them are not. And the last thing I will say is alternative credentials. So short courses like micro credentials, nano degrees, etc. So we have developed those programs in Tec de Monterrey, both to offer them as standalone programs, but also to offer a full degree and like a undergraduate degree, and disaggregate that degree in credentials, partial credentials that will allow the students to start showing that to employers and get better work. And we're sharing this in the region and around the world. And I am very happy to participate in the following questions of these panels. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jose, and great to have you with us here. I see that we have already started getting some questions in here in the chat, so I encourage all of you to put in any question that you have, either specifically to one speaker or more broadly. But before we go and collect more questions, I actually wanted to go back to my initial remarks about how we can combine these new technologies with the broader societal challenges that we see, which is we are currently facing, as you all know, severe shocks in the global economy, severe challenges for our living standards. I mean, in advanced economies, at least, real wages have declined by 6% or 6 or 7% over the last 12 months. And there seems to be some important challenges that these technologies somehow don't pay off. And I know that Mona had actually shared with me some thoughts on this in the run-up to this panel, and I would like to invite you, Mona, to maybe share this also with our audience, what your thoughts are. Why is it that we don't see more benefits from these new technologies for broader societal gains?
Thank you for that question. I'm going to borrow some scholarship and thinking from the economists here. And I think really what we're looking at here is the, odd gap between wage growth and productivity growth, or the reaping the benefits of that. So in the United States, productivity used to grow in tandem with labor compensation. But we know that this has changed dramatically since the 70s. Whereby productivity continued to grow, but compensation stagnated. This is work that, for example, has been produced by the great economist Orley Ashenfelter at Princeton. So just to illustrate this, from 1995 to 2013, the US manufacturing sector experienced a 1.3% gap between productivity growth and median wage growth. But in Germany, the gap was only at 0.2%. So that means essentially that US laborers lost their stock in productivity and in new technology infrastructure that has caused the productivity growth. Now, also, that coincided with the dismantling of unions, for example, leading to a decline in collective bargaining power. Interesting enough, we're seeing in the States at least a trend towards unionization, interesting enough, among white-collar tech workers, for example. It has also coincided with the rise of the gig economy. We just heard about Uber, and that is deeply entangled with the production and proliferation of AI systems as such. I earlier spoke about the infrastructural nature of AI. Now, in other words, workers did not lose their jobs at a large scale due to automation or technology innovation per se. In other words, AI is not to blame, but we're hearing this totalizing narrative around that risk. And I think what this panel is doing really well is providing a much more granular and fine-grained view of that intersection. And I have a few other thoughts, but I'm going to hold those for later.
So just to follow up on this point, so you're actually saying that these macro imbalances that we see between wages and productivity have a lot to do with discrimination at the workplace. So we bring in women in the workplace, we pay them less. We bring in blue-collar workers in, maybe from ethnic minorities, we pay them less, and that's part of the reason. So which would be indeed something that is, here I'm looking at you kids, would be something that's directly relevant for your issue, that actually discrimination at the workplace has broader macro implication. Maybe you can say something to that.
Yeah, and this is really where artificial intelligence is coming into play, especially with a lot of these recruitment platforms that, as I said in my introduction, are being sold on the basis of diversifying your workforce. Number one. Number two, very relevant to this conversation, they're being sold that we can analyze your current workforce, find out what their true skills are, and put them into different positions to make them happier, to have the ability for them to, the big buzzword in HR is upskilling and reskilling, which has been mentioned, and to get them into learning opportunities based upon algorithms. But again, if those algorithms are based on that historical data set and those people are not representative in those classes, it's going to be the same kind of discrimination that has got us to this place to begin with. And so much of the discussion about AI and the recruiting platforms, or even the talent management platforms, comes from the database discrimination, right? And there's a lot of good reasons for it. Most of the people in this audience and listening online know about the classic Amazon example, where they asked the machine learning to look at the people who have applied for one position over a certain period of time, and because it was mainly men, it lowered any resumes belonging to females. It's a very widely used example of the problem there. But also, and that's under the disparate impact. It's called theory of discrimination, or with that data set discriminating. But I'm also trying to raise awareness too of that AI, and very relevant to what we were just saying about the people who are getting those opportunities for the jobs, the opportunities to train, or be moved around within their company, can also be used to intentionally discriminate as well. And if now employers have access to a lot of the data that they're not allowed to make decisions on because the AI can call and correlate it much faster. And if there's tools designed where you can then filter, as you said, blue collar workers, if that breaks down to a certain race or gender, even so directly of having, potentially an HR manager with bias who wants to continue that bias. Now they have tools that can scale that in an instant. So where it takes before somebody, a talent acquisition or an HR person who has bias, time to look through their resumes, to look through their characteristics, to filter out, let's say, older women. Now with a few clicks, it can be done in a millisecond. So I do think that the use of these AI recruiting platforms, these AI talent management platforms, which is within, my jurisdiction, and then the effects of it goes into what Mona was saying about the economics of it, can very much be used to intentionally discriminate and continue that bias in a larger than before if it's not, if the people who have access to it is not, if we don't make sure that the people who have access to it are actually not being trained or have those biases, and eliminating that too. And that's much more than just the data side of it as well, where a lot of the academic conversations and even a lot of the political conversations get into.
Thank you. I think Merve and then Mona again wanted to jump in there as well.
Yes, I wanted to follow up with both Mona's and the commissioner's feedback. I think one of the, looking at the shortages and some of the issues that we're having in the workplace, I feel like we haven't addressed the root causes of talent shortages that we're experiencing properly. Unfortunately, the pandemic in every country it resulted in loss of great numbers of workforce, either to COVID-related death, long-term disability, or people having to leave the workforce for family or home care. We also had, not only in the US, but around the world, immigration policies became more restricted. We have a lot of caretakers who are not able to, either not able to or cannot afford to come back to work, weirdly enough, because caretaking at home is more expensive than what they're able to earn in certain jobs. And especially in the US, we're not giving a second chance in most jurisdictions, in most areas. We're not giving a second chance to people with criminal histories and convictions. So looking at who could be in the workforce and who's not in the workforce in the first place, looking at those root causes, and then connecting that magnitude of loss and connecting that with more accessible and equitable ways to work and access to work, I think is the fundamental question, because we're building the data, we're building the algorithmic systems on top of those questions. Without answering those, we're still trying to make more with less people, with less labor, and trying to upskill that increasingly reducing workforce and labor as well. Commissioner mentioned amplifying the data sets by bias, discrimination by data sets, and looking at possibly amplifying the historical discriminatory practices with algorithmic systems, looking at the current widening gap in workers' rights, protections, and access to work. We need to be really careful about how we are building this AI and algorithmic systems, and what is it that they are delivering. What is it they're amplifying? Without looking at the structural issues and the root causes, I think we might be going in a wrong direction and trying to hammer a technological solution to a more societal problem. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Mona, you wanted to come in again on this point.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to second what Merve has said and chime in here from the position of an educator as well, a social scientist who teaches young engineers at an engineering school, and kind of want to complicate the point about ethics a little bit more. What we are not really seeing enough is the ability to translate between technical tools and skills and solutions and a more analytical skill set around social issues and problems, and we need to change that. We can't just teach the traditional canon of ethics at engineering schools. We need to really be able to tell our students and teach our students how to actually put on their diagnostic lens for society and look at the technical tools and techniques that they have at their disposal and analyze how they sometimes come together and can lead to potential harms. That's one thing. The other thing I wanted to add on to that relatedly is that we are not seeing enough investment in education in corporations, specifically when it comes to talent that has this skill set that combines kind of social science and humanities and policy knowledge with technical skill set. Those are highly sought after and very elite positions at the moment. I know this because last year I ran a big project called A Better Tech that looked to map the field of public interest technology in the United States with focus on careers. And we're not seeing enough entry-level jobs in public interest tech roles in the industry. The expectation is that people come in with a PhD, already highly trained. And so companies are competing for this very rare talent. They need to invest in mass, and we need to change curricula at universities. The last thing related to training is coming out of the research that I'm currently conducting with recruiters who do not receive training in the use of AI technologies and on some sort of more structured level either. They are confronted with a panoply of tools and are expected to know how they work and then work with them very efficiently. And if anything, training is provided by corporations through YouTube tutorials or what have you. So I do think we have a role here of professional associations. There are a number of those, of course, in the United States. SHRM is one, the American Staffing Association is another one that we could work with to change that.
Thank you. Actually, one thought that you just raised, I wanted to use that also to give it back to David. It's just on the lack of educational investment, both from corporation and from public policymakers. The one comment I want to make here is when I talk to industry, I often get this reaction: "Oh, we always find talent. We don't need to train these people. We just go to the market." And actually, increasingly that seems to be challenged by reality. Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, talent shortages is now really pervasive. So the question really becomes: is what do we need to do to invest more? Is it just the public policymakers that need to do more, or is industry also on the line for that, David?
Thank you. And I wanted to make a couple of points, one on skills and also the impacts of AI in the workplace. And addressing this skill shortage, we've taken an approach we call skills first hiring, which means we don't look at people's degrees as in the first instance. We look at what can they do and what do they know and what is their ability to learn. And skills first hiring has meant in the US, for example, we've gone from about 95% of our positions requiring a minimum 4-year college degree to more than 50% we are advertising without a college degree requirement. Now, you might say, well, that just means you're getting a lower cost labor force. And well, that's not true. We're hiring people into these jobs without degrees, paying them the same in jobs related to AI, cloud, digital design, software engineering, many others. And these are people who've done what Jose was talking about in terms of building a stack of skills or digital credentials or work experience in other ways, maybe through the military, etc., but who know how to do these jobs and who are well equipped. And we can provide any additional necessary training within IBM. And now, 20% of our hires in the US are without a college degree, and they're doing very well. I'd also like to, comment on a lot of what we've talked about here so far has been, well, what can go wrong with AI and the dangers of AI versus what can go right. Just in the last few days, a research group called the Partnership on AI, which has members across NGOs, business, worker organizations, and so on, released a study on AI in the workplace. And the key finding in that is that workers genuinely appreciate aspects of AI in their work if it's augmenting their ability to do their job. So, when it's helpful, workers like it. The other important finding, though, was that, how managers or executives, leadership and employers implement and deploy AI is crucial to its impact. And, that relates to that point I made about having a culture of ethics within the employer as a kind of a foundation for successful AI that, at best, that avoids some of these negative impacts or concerns that we've talked about.
Thank you. I like this point about people acquiring their skills as they do their job. So this on the job learning, if you want. But I wonder to what extent these experience skills, if you want, are really transferable easily. And I just refer here to a study that McKinsey released earlier this year about the importance of experience capital, if you want, so the knowledge that you acquire over your career, over your lifetime. And actually, when you think about it, is in most advanced economies, at least at the end of your life cycle, of your end of your career, if you want, these kind of acquired skills represent 40% of your total earnings, which means, in a sense, that if you cannot if you cannot easily transfer them to a new job because it's not being recognized, because there's no certificates, etc., you actually lose out on this potential. And the question then becomes, to what extent can new technologies help to develop this kind of digital certificates, or to what needs to be done in this? And I think, Matthew, maybe you can give us some insights about your work on these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a couple of challenges we could look there in terms of how to deliver that sort of upskilling, reskilling training into particular disciplines, and then maybe some of the work we've done at Turing to try and overcome those. I think one of the greatest challenges that we face is around contextualization, and what an approach that we've taken here is around stimulating the development of teams who engage really deeply across data science and AI expertise and the needs of particular organizations to develop out tailored training in response to those particular needs, in recognition of the particular development pathways that individuals in those roles are going to have. And a lot of work that we've led out of Turing has been on the basis of open source, which has certain benefits. So what we want to do is democratize access to training to the individuals who need it. People who are in the workforce now and have a just-in-time requirement for training in a particular area. But we also want to support the rest of the training ecosystem. So whether that's academics in university departments wanting to bring data science and AI education to their learners, but they face certain systematic barriers in being able to do so. So a few schemes that we've led are open source online learning calls, where the institute pay for collaborative teams to develop training in these areas of identified need out into particular sectors. A strand of educator upskilling, bringing individuals from industry as well as from universities to recognize that actually at the moment there is a challenge in terms of what does effective pedagogy look like for reskilling of individuals and what are the considerations there. So to provide long-term support, mentoring and evidence-led training in that sort of space. And I think probably a theme that's cut across all of the responses today has been that no sector alone is going to be able to resolve the challenges that we're talking about here. So it's really this need to stimulate collaboration across industry, academia, learned societies, charities, NGOs in response to those, and to find mechanisms to open up that dialogue.
Actually, I think that's a very good point, and that's a point that I also wanted to ask Jose his opinion about. I mean, you are based in Monterrey, which is the hotspot, the economic hotspot of Mexico. What's your point on how to kind of integrate lifelong learning strategies that you develop at your institute in the broader ecosystem in your region? I mean, how do you do this? What kind of dialogue do you engage in, both with business leaders, with business association, and maybe also with trade unions?
No, we're working with governments in different states in Mexico, in particular in Nuevo León and Guanajuato, to develop skills, digital skills frameworks, for the development of the workforce in those states. We also have a project in an African country where we're working with a World Bank around that. And this is the kind of things that we're doing is mainly with governments and some private companies, big corporations. I will also add to the discussion of bias in AI in general, because we have a lot of biases also as persons. No? So I know that even the name that you have can be associated to some kind of people, and I'm not talking only about ethnicity and the all the things that you can have as a prejudice or stereotypes of an ethnicity, but also a name. There are other kinds of biases related to, for instance, hiring of faculty in universities. Ivy League universities get the biggest part of the hirings, and I don't think it's founded by results. It's easier for you to make someone else to do the recruitment than you. And there's also biases when we hire women in every place. When it's the first employment, maybe not so much. When it's not the first employment, you take the previous job salary as a reference, and then you continue to get those biases in the organization. So one of the problems with AI, as someone say on this panel, is that AI is based on learning from previous data sets. So the one of the biggest problems that I think that we have with AI is that we cannot explain the process of why these persons were hired. And when you're talking to someone else and trying to explain the process of how you selected someone else instead of another one, at least you could eventually make tangible your selection and discuss on the reasons and the bias around that. And artificial intelligence, normally, if you're using machine learning, you cannot do that. No? So I think that's one of the big problems: how to explain the process on how do you arrive to select some people and not to select other people. And it's going to be hard to do that, but I think it's worth discussing also on this panel.
Thank you. Absolutely correct. So I would like to use the last 20 minutes that we have, maybe opening the floor again to our distinguished audience here. We had a few questions in the chat. I think we mostly answered them, but maybe also here in the room there are people who would like to raise their questions. So please feel free to jump in. As I said, we have a few minutes left in this panel, and it would be nice to. Yes, please. Do we have a mic? Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I have a question. So there's been a lot of talk about how these AI can help, if they're non-biased, they can help solve discrimination. But there's another problem with these technologies, namely that those who mostly study and develop them are mostly white males. So, and this could, for instance, exacerbate existing inequalities at upstreams while trying to solve the inequalities downstream. So my question is this issue discussed with this talk about both AI and discrimination, how to use AI in the workplace, or skill and skill development?
Thank you very much. So just to repeat for those in the online, maybe you haven't heard it, is the question really is, does the...
it was there very clearly, no problem.
Do you want to answer this, Jose?
No, well, I just want to add that is why Occidental males. No, it's not only white males.
Okay, yeah.
I think this goes to an issue that we talked about earlier about the diversity in this area and what has precluded these groups from entering this area of the workforce, this line of business. And what we find, and this goes back to the job descriptions and what we were talking about as far as, for instance, a college degree and the relevancy of entering these positions. Now, a lot of times, what we find is there's a lot of bias in the job advertisements. There's a lot of job bias in the job descriptions themselves, just based upon historical requirements that are put in, largely because a lot of employers just copy and paste job descriptions from LinkedIn or the internet, but you don't know what biases you're building into your job or your ability to enter in that area in the workforce that may not be required. So that has historically prevented people from getting in. Now there's AI that's helping with job descriptions and going through and finding more gender neutral language. For instance, for the engineering position you're talking about, I know you're talking about the academic side, which I'll address in a minute, but even to get in the workforce, when the majority, especially in Silicon Valley in the US, when a lot of job description says we're looking for a ninja coder, or we're looking for a rock star coder, which is very commonplace, but that may prevent women from applying if those terms are used. So there's actually AI going through and saying, if you change these words, you may more likely to get certain people of different national origins, different genders to apply. But from the academic sense, how do you get more people into engineering schools, and how do you actually get them to feel more comfortable applying? Now, we know, to what you said, if it's being developed by certain characteristics, potentially some of those biases are going to be built in. And it goes to the larger issue that we deal with in the United States about diversifying workforces. I mean, everyone knows the statistics out there that diverse workforces that are more diverse make more money. They build bigger products. So I don't think it's as unique to just getting everyone in the door there, but it's this more global issue of how do we address those biases that are holding people back. And if it's, from my perspective, from the enforcement side, and from being a labor and employment attorney before this, is it the way words are written and where job descriptions are written that have been historically preventing people from doing in there? And we heard from IBM, they're doing a lot to remove some of those unnecessary requirements that have always just been considered requirements for these certain positions, and no one can articulate why until you realize nobody's applying. And I think one more point on the caregiver issues that we're seeing very much in the US, and caregiver discrimination is a real thing that the commission is addressing as well. So if caregivers, which are predominantly women, are now leaving the workforce to deal with their children, to deal with their elderly parents have moved in, we're also eliminating them from the data sets, right? From our applicant pools, from our workforce. So when then we go and spend a lot of money to upskill and diversify, or upskill and reskill the workforce, and we're looking at characteristics of who are there, suddenly all the female workers in their prime earning years are no longer in that data set. So you may have had a data set but if you're not keeping up with the changes in the workforce in the pandemic, that's also an issue as well. So I wanted to bring that point up.
Thank you. I think Merve, you wanted to jump in there as well.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in the question about governance and which questions, who is involved and which questions are asked. I think the issue is a bit wider than just white males. I think even if you had diverse-looking people around the table, if they're only from certain disciplinary backgrounds, for example, all computer scientists and data scientists, but looking different, it's still a group of data scientists or computer scientists. I think we need to stand back and kind of look at the wider diversity of disciplines as we look at this, and not just like the physical characters or immediately recognizable characters. And also in terms of what other questions should be asked when we talk about AI governance, ethical and responsible AI development and governance. It's not only about, who's at the table, but what is it with the whole organization, starting from its mission and value alignment to the products that it's developing and using, what kind of people they're hiring, how they're incentivizing their employees, what kind of criteria is used to promote employees. Are there mechanisms and tools available to flag concerns if people see algorithms or AI systems impacting certain groups negatively? So it's a whole group of values, processes, procedures, and incentives that should be taken into consideration and not just one part of the development.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think before I give you the floor, David, I would like to bring in discussion. Maybe you can integrate it into your answer that we had in the chat here, which is how do the discussion of the panel on the existing issues on the labor market, including the need to address biases, improve training, and take transferable skills into account, can be translated into public policy so as to achieve a meaningful structural impact. And in a sense, for you, David, the question is, what do you expect you as an industry from policymakers in that respect?
Okay, thanks. That's a really good question. I think part of this is policy, part of this is practice and culture. As Merve and others have said, when we embarked on that skills first hiring policy, one of our objectives was to actually increase diversity in the intake of tech workers. And this has been a big success because we're now recruiting much more from outside the US tech hotspots, Boston, New York, Silicon Valley, etc. And now getting far more employees from places like West Virginia, Louisiana, non-traditional sources of tech workers and from non-traditional backgrounds, Starbucks baristas, hairdressers, and so on. I mean, it's quite extraordinary, the talent that's out there that is under recognized. Also, in terms of putting diversity into the development process, I mentioned in my opening this process of co-creation. When you bring literally thousands of employees from all different parts of your business together as diverse co-creators of an AI piece of software, you do get those diverse perspectives coming into the design, development, and renewal and deployment processes. And for employers, there are many layers to this beyond recruitment. Obviously, it's the work we have to do with schools or colleges that are serving more diverse communities, for example. It's supporting those schools, it's ensuring they have the technology, ensuring their instructors are taught in the technology, and it's aggressively recruiting from those venues. But for government policy, we really need to ensure that workers have the ability to take on some of these reskilling opportunities, and that they are not only supported financially, but they can schedule their training and reskilling courses at a time that fits with their work schedules, or that they can get time off to do these things. There are many factors as to why adult education is underutilized, and governments need to point policy at those factors, and it's just not only financial. So because workers in small and medium enterprises don't have the advantage of an AI-driven learning platform like our employees have, so they have to get access to learning in some other ways at a time and a cost and a place that's convenient to them.
Absolutely, thank you very much. I think Mona, you also shared some thoughts with me before the panel, and maybe you can bring these points in, especially when it comes to making broader public policy initiative that should be taken in this respect.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think one thing that is extremely important, but that I thankfully see more and more, is that policymakers should work more closely with scientists and understanding the role that AI plays, but also with stakeholders. So perhaps adopt a more stakeholder-driven approach and think about compensation for stakeholder engagement in policymaking processes. We need a better working out of regulatory mechanisms that are meaningful. I'm going to bring in the professions again. I think there is a lot of potential here. And I also do think, and I'm going to speak to my profession now, that researchers have a huge responsibility to provide their insight for policymaking and set stakeholder engagement. I think we could see a lot more there. And I think, again, policymaking could actually incentivize the higher ed and learning community to engage in much broader public education initiatives. I do want to second what has been said before as well, drifting away from the more elite centers of education, I think is much needed. I want to give a shout out to the Capper Center, for example, in Oakland, who are doing excellent work in that regard. And I also want to second what has been said about culture. I am personally reluctant to recommend that my students apply to certain companies when I know that they're become just diversity hires and are actually not going to face support for career progression. And I think we need to think about that. We can't just think about window dressing with regards to diversity, but really think about how we can change cultures, and policies can change cultures. We do know this. And I want to point to the work of Mar Hicks, who's a historian of technology, who wrote a fantastic book called Programmed Inequality, where she showed how policy actually was deeply entangled with enforcing gender stereotypes, and actually changed the computing landscape in the United Kingdom after the Second World War, and has partially created what we now describe as the pipeline problem, whereby more diverse communities are sometimes, and I'm going to use this word deliberately, blamed for not entering the pipeline for these high-powered jobs.
Thank you, Mona. Jose, before I give the floor to you, I actually wanted to, and Mona, thanks that you gave me the hint here that I should bring Matt on this point. What's your experience in the UK with these interlinkages between government and businesses? I mean, you have experience in the interlink between the two. I mean, can you share a bit your insights on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe we'll build on the great question from the room. And I think it's probably one of the policy interventions in the data and AI space that's been most successful. And I think one that, has real merit is around fully funded postgraduate degrees for people from historically underrepresented groups to get into the field. So in 2018, the government put up £13 million, and they've just committed another 17 million to support paid scholarships for individuals. And you can see that is addressing part of the problem. In my role at Newcastle, I was an awardee of one of those projects, so I can reflect a little bit on the problems that remain. What you have is people coming into these programs who maybe have quite fragile professional networks compared to the peers who are better represented. Challenges in terms of the instruction capacity, in terms of a university, in terms of how it deals with this sort of more diverse intake, but also the reflection that if I speak to my peers who are unaware who's come through a scholarship route and who hasn't, these candidates are indistinguishable within about 4 months, if that. And I think I loved Jose's sort of power skills phrase for, the tenacity, the creativity, the problem solving. Those are things that come in spades. I think something I'm very keen that we emphasize here is not a deficit model in terms of these types of training interventions. Something I push very hard is guaranteed industry internships, which are paid, integrated, and guaranteed at the point of entry. And absolutely what we hear from the employers that we engage with is that there's a reverse mentoring that goes on. The employers learn a lot more around their recruitment practices. To Keith's point around job descriptions, it helps them really, see clarity in how those can be framed to not disadvantage those applicants. Having part-time routes available, not having the shopping list of job descriptions. I mean, with the master's program that I run, this is around the time when learners come to me and say, "Can I have a reference?" I probably on paper qualify for about 10 or 15% of entry-level data science roles that people are going for. It's your classic 5 years experience of a Python library that's existed for 3 and things like that. So I think some of the other work that's going on at the government level is around clarity of role descriptors. So you look in one organization, you have a data scientist or someone with that title, they would be a data analyst elsewhere. That's problematic for the organizations, but for underserved groups, they're the people who are hit hardest by it because they don't have clarity around whether they can belong and whether they can be a beneficiary. So, and then just to I suppose answer your question around that interface, our flagship approach is the Data Skills Task Force in the UK, which does exactly this, recognizes that we need to bring these different organizations together and is a policy forum around the sort of addressing those sort of skills challenges.
Excellent, thank you very much. So I'm conscious of time. We have 6 minutes left, and I really want all of our excellent panelists to have a chance to maybe share some final words. But before that, I put you in a challenge to actually answer that question that we have in the chat as part of your final words. And the chat question is this: how do you see the possibility of auditing these technologies post-deployment in the real context of use using real data, including sensitive data, and in compliance with GDPR and other laws? So please think about this. How you can use that as a hook for your last reflection. And I put you on the spot, Keith, as the one who started our conversation, and please be the one who.
Well, we could have gone for many more hours, and I really appreciate being on such an esteemed panel. But from my perspective, where I started, as if artificial intelligence is going to be the solution to everything we discuss, which it may or may be, a big part of it, as companies integrate AI more, we have to make sure that it doesn't discriminate. And from my perspective, from sitting in Washington, D.C., and a lot of these products being developed in the United States and being used globally, and especially with the significant interest in regulating AI technology here, is that the technology may be new, but the civil rights protections for workers in the workforce and who want to enter the workforce are not. And they apply equally to these new technologies that are out there now, or the ones that haven't even been developed yet, that are so futuristic. The same way as HR professionals doing it on pen and paper since the 1960s. And we can't lose sight of that. And especially now, as companies start to turn over algorithms to the management of employees, aside from the privacy issues related to that, I don't know of an algorithm or computer sophisticated enough that could see what a manager, a human with their own eyes, can see with an employee struggling. And that's really important in the United States and worldwide for individuals with disabilities, for individuals who are pregnant, for individuals who need religious accommodations. And if they're being subject to their performance reviews by an algorithm, I don't know the sophistication level of a quantum computer being able to say this person is not hitting their goal for the day or making enough widgets because of a disability, where a human would know that and they would make an accommodation for them. So the whole concept of the human in the loop, we just, and I think we all agree, you can't have a set it and forget it approach to HR technologies, because whether it's in either inaccurate, incomplete data, or just this lack of human oversight, the whole empathy conversation, which we haven't had enough time to discuss, computers can't do that, but humans can. So that is probably right now the most critical takeaway I have for companies who are instituting artificial intelligence, with the many benefits that come with it.
Thank you, Keith. David, your thoughts, your final thoughts, and maybe your final thoughts also in terms of these post-deployment audits.
Yeah, just on the point of audits, we do continue to proactively address, audit, and monitor our own AI through its life cycle. We continually test, we review the data to ensure that we're getting the kind of outcomes that we ought to be getting, and that fair and equitable treatment are part of those outcomes. And I think that's a good practice for any employer deploying AI. But look, as the commissioner has pointed out, the potential harms from workplace AI are not new or novel. They're differently characterized or created harms which other practices or processes can make happen. So look, final thought is that, I'll go back to that point of culture in terms of employer practices and the need to reinforce those good practices to get good outcomes from AI, because it's not going to solve all our problems. It's going to be a help for employers. It's going to be a help for workers, but it's like any tool. It needs to be managed effectively.
Thank you, David. Merve, your final thoughts.
Thank you for that. +1 to everything Commissioner said in his final remarks. I just wanted to add something along the lines of moving away from exploitative models to more equitable ways of working and responding. I think laser focus on profit and market share for the companies can result in treatment of employees as numbers on a spreadsheet or data points in productivity or revenue analysis. It can also impose surveillance and monitoring of employees, which we didn't have time to discuss, rather than trusting the employees to do the right thing, make their effort worth the work. And in the context of AI, we see a lot of companies adopting AI-based surveillance systems to monitor employees' behavior in an effort to control them. My concluding remarks is, instead of surveillance and monitoring and focusing on the numbers, to Commissioner's points, focusing on the empathy and human elements and decency of work and protection of rights, which eventually will result in better results for the companies as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Merve.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Mona, your final thoughts, and maybe especially on this last point on emphasis, how can we bring that in better into our policy frameworks?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I'm actually going to say a word about audits. Audits are possible post-deployment, and stealth audits are also possible. We've done one together with 2 other scientists that developed a holistic framework for AI audits that actually includes an assessment of the potential harmful assumptions and pseudoscience theories that underpin some of these hiring technologies. The paper is called Silicon Valley Love Triangle. And we also conducted an audit of personality testing software and found, for example, that a different input type can predict a different personality for the same candidate. I will also say that recruiters, that's separate, but second point, recruiters do not have an interest in discriminating. I think that's important to say as well. They do very clearly see that AI cannot assess these extremely important transferable skills. So I think we need to look at the intersection of transferable skills in technology and prediction acutely in the future. I want to second, thirdly, the point that these aren't new problems, and we mustn't get paralyzed by the narrative that AI is this entirely game-changing new technologies that is creating entirely new problems that we first need to assess and wait and see what's going to happen. We can come in right now, I think. And then the last point I want to make is in terms of actually getting policy on the road. I think conversations like these are extremely important. We should probably talk more to stakeholders and people who are affected, whether that's professions or people who are being enrolled in these kinds of technologies by way of being exposed to them. So thinking maybe about stakeholder and consumer protection here. And we need to, last point, think about what are we actually regulating? Are we regulating an idea, an industry, a specific technology, a business model? And so on. I think we need clarity around that if we think about how we can future-proof regulatory approaches to AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. Matthew, your last thoughts.
I think all I would add would be the need for professionalization of the occupation of data science and AI professionals, ranging from people who are not writing code but have a governance responsibility around the introduction of the technology, right through to the people doing direct development there. In the same way that we have certain assurances through chartership of the person building the bridge over the motorway that professional values are going to be upheld and checks and balances are in place. I think there's a strong opportunity there, and as well recognizing that skills gap in terms of that governance piece as well.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Skills gap is the last transition to Jose. you have the last word, certainly not the least. Thank you. Please.
Thanks. So I believe there's a combination of transparency, technology, and culture. As David said, I will agree with him. And I give you an example of something that could be done by governments, but I don't know that someone is doing this anywhere in the world. So we could have, in some countries, you have ratings for hospital success rates, and you decide where to get your heart operation. Where's the place where you have the best success rate? I don't know of a country that has a centralized place where you can see the success rate of universities and the cost of that, and what's the ROI of your investment in those universities. And there's also no place where you can have that for short cycle programs, micro-credential boot camps, and other alternatives for that, no? But even if that existed, you need to have the culture that people go to those places to make their decisions, no? So you need to have the systems and the culture, and the same happens with artificial intelligence in the workplace. You need to have people that is trained on the advantages and what the things that you can do on that, but also the shortcomings, so that you understand up to where you can let the machine help you, and when you have to take decisions taken by a human. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Culture instead of technology. Thanks. That's a great concluding words. Thank you very much to the panel, both online, both here and here in the room. Thank you very much to all of you to participate in this panel. I really hope that this is just the start of a conversation, that we continue this both through email exchange and other forms of communication. Thanks a lot, and wishing you a great afternoon, great rest of the morning over in North America. Thank you.